In 1970, AMC made a bold move when it introduced the AMC Gremlin, a subcompact that arrived just as America was beginning to worry about fuel and rising gas prices. The Gremlin was ahead of its time, compact, economical, and affordable. In its early years, it felt like a smart punch to the ribs of Detroit. But by the late 1970s, the Gremlin was no longer the pioneer. It began to look dated, rough around the edges, and was surrounded by sharper new competitors like the Chevrolet Vega and the Ford Pinto. The subcompact market share, once AMC's vital territory, was gradually being eroded by the Big Three. And then, in 1979, while automakers began talking about efficiency under tightening emission standards, AMC decided to turn the wheel in a direction no one expected. They took a small subcompact platform. They infused it with a name filled with late 1960s memories: AMC Spirit AMX. They borrowed the spirit of pop culture exploding across the big screen. And most importantly, they stuffed a V8 engine into that compact body. It was not a decision that made sense on a financial spreadsheet. It was a gamble, a declaration that even when pushed into a corner, AMC was not ready to surrender the soul of the American muscle car. But to understand why that name was born, we have to rewind a few years back to a car that was once AMC's pride and gradually became its burden. When it first appeared in 1970, the AMC Gremlin was a bold strike in the middle of the horsepower wars. While Detroit was still obsessed with 4,455 cubic inches, AMC introduced a small, inexpensive, practical car, a different choice for an America beginning to worry about fuel. The Gremlin wasn't beautiful by traditional standards. Its rear end looked almost abruptly cut off, simple round headlights, a slender grille. Yet it was precisely that difference that made it stand out. But after 9 years, as I mentioned earlier, a design once considered unconventional had now become outdated. The rounded lines of the early 1970s were gradually replaced by sharper, more angular shapes. At this point, the key role belonged to one man, Dick Teague, AMC's chief stylist. Teague did not have the budget to create an entirely new platform. He was forced music to do what AMC had always done best: reinvent from what already existed. Using the Gremlin's chassis, Nahi and his team redrew the entire appearance, breathing into it a new spirit, cleaner, more modern, and better suited to the late 1970s. The result was the birth of the AMC Spirit. The old round headlight clusters were replaced with rectangular units. A small detail, but enough to change the entire character of the front end. The grille became more squared off, more solid. The body lines were sharpened instead of softened. Altogether, it created an image that felt more mature, more serious. But the biggest change wasn't at the front, it was at the rear. If the Gremlin had been boldly cut off, the Spirit, especially in its liftback version, chose a completely different path. The roofline stretched farther back, forming a smooth, sloping fastback profile. The rear was no longer abrupt, but cohesive, more aerodynamic. In profile, the Spirit looked longer than it actually was, lower than it actually was, and most importantly, it looked ready for something more athletic. And when the AMC team looked at the new AMC Spirit platform, they didn't just see a subcompact replacing the Gremlin. They saw one last opportunity to reignite the memory of the late 1960s muscle car era. A time when the badge on the hood could make a man's heartbeat rise with just 3 letters, AMX. That name had once been attached to fierce two-seat coups from 1968 to 1970. It represented rebellion, a time when 390 cubic inches didn't need anyone's permission to roar down the highway. When they decided to revive that badge on a compact hatchback, AMC knew they were playing a risky hand. But in that moment, risk was almost the only option they had left. And they understood one thing clearly. If they simply slapped the AMX letters onto the body without changing its substance, customers would see right through it. That's why the Spirit AMX was not just a visual trim package. It had to drive differently. It had to feel different. The suspension was tuned in true GT rally fashion. And a stiffer sway bar were added to reduce body roll in corners. Adjustable strider shocks allowed better control over uneven pavement. The steering system was recalibrated for more direct feedback, something anyone who had ever held the wheel of a real muscle car would notice within the first few miles. Up front, stronger front disc brakes were fitted, while the rear retained drum brakes optimized to balance braking force. This was not a drag racer built only for straight-line blasts. And AMC wanted it to carry a road rally character, agile, compact, ready to carve through two-lane roads across the Midwest. But then came the most important question: the engine. At first, the Spirit platform could be equipped with a 258 cubic inline-six, a durable, adequate, and economically sensible engine. But when placed next to the AMX badge, it simply didn't carry enough symbolic weight. An AMX without a V8 would be nothing more than a shadow of itself. So, the decision was made. The 258 inline-six option was eliminated for this version. If they were going to revive a legend, they had to do it properly. Under the hood of the AMC Spirit AMX would sit a true V8. They did not develop an entirely new engine. Instead, they reused the 304 cubic inch V8, an engine that had first appeared in 1970, once rated at around 210 gross horsepower during its glory years. A compact, durable, small block, strong enough to restore dignity to the AMX badge. But 1979 was no longer 1970. And by the middle of the decade, emissions regulations had tightened dramatically. EPA standards forced automakers to sacrifice what had once been the soul of the muscle car. High compression ratios, free-flowing exhaust systems, and ambitious multi-arrow carburetors. AMC's 3004 V8 did not escape that fate. The compression ratio was lowered to just 8.44 to 1. The exhaust system became more restrictive to control emissions. Instead of a powerful 4-barrel carburetor, the engine was fitted with a 2-barrel Motorcraft carburetor, a safer choice, but one that suffocated performance. The result? A number that made many V8 enthusiasts sigh: 125 net horsepower and approximately 219 foot-pounds of torque. If you grew up in an era when 300 to 350 horsepower was considered normal, then 125 horsepower sounds almost like an apology, but it has to be viewed in context. By the late 1970s, the entire American auto industry was being strangled. That same year, the Ford Mustang with its 302 V8 produced only around 140 horsepower. No one was truly winning this game. The Spirit AMX was not weak because the engineers lacked talent. It was weak because the era no longer allowed it to be strong. The 4-speed manual transmission with a 2.87 to 1 gear ratio helped music extract the most from that modest output, while the optional 3-speed automatic with a 2.56 to 1 ratio offered a smoother, more relaxed experience for everyday drivers. And somewhere out there, the high-altitude version of the AMC Spirit AMX was a rare configuration intended for states above 5,000 feet, such as Colorado. At higher elevations, thinner air caused the 304 Music cubic inch V8 to run too rich and lose performance. AMC therefore recalibrated the two-barrel Motorcraft carburetor with smaller jets and adjusted the ignition timing to optimize combustion. There was no special badge or exterior identifier. All the changes were hidden deep within the mechanical setup. But production numbers were extremely limited, especially since total AMX output in 1979 was already low. Today, only the original build sheet can confirm this configuration, turning it into a quiet yet highly valuable detail among collectors. If you've ever experienced this version, share your thoughts in the comments below. The front end of the AMC Spirit AMX was defined by its aggressive, blacked-out grille. The front bumper was finished in black instead of bright chrome, when giving it a utilitarian feel like a car born to charge down dirt roads rather than sit in front of a restaurant. The H-halogen lighting system, a significant upgrade at the time, delivered a wider, more focused beam for dark stretches of highway. Just below sat a low, wide front air dam, making the compact hatchback appear more planted to the pavement. At the rear, a large rear spoiler extended from the fastback tail, almost oversized for a car weighing under 3,000 pounds. Yet, that very excess gave it character. It wasn't trying to be subtle, it wanted to be seen. Then came the wheels, where the Spirit AMX truly found its attitude. The 14 by 7-inch turbo cast two wheels paired with ER60 by 14 Flex 10 radial tires created a wide planted stance. The wheel wells were flared outward, tightly framing the tires, evoking the feel of a scaled-down European rally car, but with an American V8 soul. In profile, the car's shoulders appeared broader, lower, and far more muscular than its actual dimensions would suggest. Inside the cabin, AMC understood that the AMX badge demanded more than exterior flair. The custom bucket seats offered a tighter embrace, music delivering a distinctly sporty feel through the corners. The center console integrated a floor-mounted manual shifter positioned high and within easy reach, encouraging the driver to engage more directly with the machine up front. The digital clock, a very late 770s touch, combined with a manifold vacuum gauge and an oil pressure gauge, reminded the driver that this was not merely transportation, but a mechanical instrument meant to be listened to. The thick leather-wrapped steering wheel transmitted just enough of the V8's characteristic vibration while still providing music a sense of refinement inside a subcompact. And then the most controversial detail. Inspired by the cinematic phenomenon of Smoke Okie and the Bandit, in the film that turned the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am into a pop culture icon, AMC decided to place a massive flame decal across the hood of the Spirit AMX. A direct statement, a response that did not try to hide. To many, it was over the top, but to AMC, it was necessary. When you don't have the advertising budget to compete, you let the car speak for itself. Thanks to its lightweight under 3,000 pounds, this small hatchback had an advantage many full-sized muscle cars did not: agility. While the heavy coups of the early 1970s struggled against their own inertia, the Spirit AMX moved with far more nimbleness through technical sections of road. Music. The high point came when AMC brought two AMX cars to Europe to compete in the FIA Group 124-hour race at Nürburgring. It marked the first time an American team entered this prestigious endurance event with a small V8 hatchback, and the result, they finished first and second in their class. Not an overall victory, but enough to prove that this was more than just a stripe and decal package sitting in a showroom. That moment felt like the last light of the day, brief yet brilliant, because back home, the market was telling a different story. In 1979, total Spirit production reached around 53,000 units, but the AMX version accounted for only 3,657 cars, and among those, only a small fraction actually carried the V8 engine. American consumers at the time were focused on fuel economy, durability, and insurance costs, not a hatchback wearing a badge from the past. In 1980, AMC quietly eliminated the V8 option. That decision turned the 1979 V8 model into a true one-year wonder, a brief chapter in history. By 1983, the Spirit line was replaced by the Renault Alliance, a clear sign that AMC had to seek survival through international partnership. And then in 1987, what no one wanted but many had anticipated finally happened. American Motors Corporation was acquired by Chrysler and is closing the journey of the small automaker that once dared to challenge the Big Three. But there is something fascinating about the AMC Spirit AMX. Its true potential never lay in the original 125 net horsepower figure. It lay in what the car could become. The 304 cubic inch V8 was never a weak engine. It was simply restrained. Swap the two carburetor for a proper 4-barrel unit. Pair it with a free-flowing dual exhaust system, and output could easily climb past 200 horsepower. You add performance heads and fine-tune the ignition timing, and that number could rise even further. And more importantly, throttle response would come alive, delivering the feel of a true muscle car. The Spirit AMX's engine bay was a major advantage, because the platform had been designed to accommodate both the inline-six and the V8. The workspace was relatively generous for a car of its overall size. For enthusiasts, that was a gift. Enough room to wrench, enough room to upgrade, and enough room to transform a mild-mannered hatchback into a genuine hot rod. And then came the bigger dream, the engine swap. Many owners didn't stop at the 3004. They turned to AMC's 401 cubic inch V8, once rated at around 330 gross horsepower and 430 foot-pounds of torque in its early 1970s stock form, or the 390 from the classic late 1960s AMX models, when those engines were dropped into a body weighing under 3,000 pounds. The Spirit AMX transformed into a true beast, small, compact, and yet boasting an impressive power-to-weight ratio. That was the moment the car fulfilled the promise the EPA had once forced it to postpone. In a way, the Spirit AMX was like a blank canvas. Music AMC had sketched its final bold lines upon it. But it was the classic car community that ultimately filled in the colors and completed the masterpiece. So in the end, what is the AMC Spirit AMX really? It wasn't the most powerful muscle car of the 1970s. It wasn't a sales success, and it certainly wasn't a cinematic icon like the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. The Spirit AMX was a bold fusion of two worlds that seemed never meant to meet: a compact subcompact hatchback and a nostalgic V8 at a time when the entire industry was turning its back on large displacement engines. It was an act that bordered on rebellion in 1979. While everyone else was talking about fuel economy, AMC was still talking about driving feel. In today's market, the Spirit AMX rarely appears. But when it does, Prices typically range from $20,000 to $30,000 for a well-kept example. A relatively soft figure compared to many muscle cars of the same era for those who understand the value of a one-year V8 hatchback. It's more of an opportunity than a risk. And now I want to ask you, have you ever known someone who owned a Spirit AMX? Or have you ever seen one in person? Compact. A flame decal stretched across the hood. The deep V8 rumble echoing down a quiet street. Yeah, share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you love the cars that were forgotten but never lost their soul, hit like and subscribe so we can keep unspooling those old dust-covered reels hidden away in America's garages. See you in the next story.